Welcome back to another episode of the CyberVault. I'm very excited to be joined by Brian Hill today. Brian is the head of security services at BlackCloak, and BlackCloak are a leader in digital executive protection. Brian has spent many years helping organizations and execs safeguard their digital footprint, mitigate the risks before they become threats, and today he's here to share insights into the best practices for protecting execs and their families in an increasingly digital world. We're going to cover things from best practices, BlackCloak's new standards, and some key insights from recent Ponemon Institute research that highlight the growing risk for executives online. But before we unpack all of that, Brian, a pleasure to have you on. Why don't you maybe kickstart, tell everybody a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Katie, for having me on your podcast. And my background is I spent 15 years in law enforcement, and the last 8 of that in major crimes detective. So doing homicides, sex crimes, specializing in mobile forensics and computer forensics. So working on task forces like internet crimes against children, for example. So trained by the Secret Service, doing a lot of that. Also, a 10-year military veteran in the Air Force, doing some manpower systems. And then when I got out of law enforcement about 10 years ago, specializing in cyber, I got my master's degree from the University of Minnesota in security technologies. And for the last few years, I've been building out security operations centers and trying to protect companies and individuals.
Absolutely. I mean, very exciting. You've had one of those careers that I think gives you the really cool perspective of kind of the real world applications, the business applications, and obviously now the executives and what it's like kind of working in what arguably is probably one of the fastest evolving landscapes in technology. But we'll unpack all of that today. I mean, the first thing that I really want to just break down, because to anybody new to the concept, could you maybe just explain what DEP is? And for anybody listening, DEP stands for Digital Executive Protection. So, yeah, tell us a little bit more about that and maybe why it's becoming so critical in this current landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. So digital executive protection, everyone, it's the side you don't see. Everyone sees bodyguards for celebrities and athletes, that executive protection, the physical presence, cameras, whatever it is, all eyes on them. The digital side is think of all the stuff that we have access to and safeguarding that information. That's the digital side. And it's all encompassing. There's a lot of different areas in that. And that is why what we'll talk about later is that framework. But so think of all the stuff that you're tied to, whether it's public information available about you, your devices. You look at our mobile phones in particular, they hold the keys to a lot of information. They are a treasure trove of information. In law enforcement, if I got somebody's phone and could get into it, a lot of information I could dissect. And they're essentially, as I like to call, snitches in our pocket, right? They track everything that we do. And our data is only as secure by the means that we access it. Meaning, if our devices aren't secure, our email's not secure, then we're giving out information, and that's just one part of it. We then you have your homes too. Think of all the smart devices in our homes today, and how they're connected, and the data that they transmit. Personal computers, granted, we still use them, not as much as we used to, but they're still there. They're in our homes. They're connected. Our identities as well. So it's the digital executive protection is that holistic. There's so many different areas. We have the privacy is the big area, devices, your home, and then education is the other piece of executive protection.
Yeah, and I think kind of it's always really interesting to look at because I always joke that my phone's like my livelihood. At the end of the day, I mean everything is on there, and if you go through a period where you don't have a phone, you forget how much it holds. But even more, like I don't really use a personal laptop for all that much because I can do it all on like a phone and stuff like that. But what you also forget is how reliant you are on like password protections and even just being able to get into your banking apps and stuff like that if you don't have everything that's saved on there. So imagine what it's like if somebody gets hold of that, especially if you're an executive or somebody who arguably has probably some more valuable information than I've got on there. I don't think people are too bothered about going into my Instagram, but it's really interesting as well to kind of break down because we obviously really want to touch base on the recently announced new DEP standards. I mean, you kind of briefly mentioned it there, but could you explain what they are and kind of why they're important?
Yeah, absolutely. We when we talk about digital executive protection, because it is concept wise, it's relatively new, very well needed, but it's taking a look, it's a proactive strategy that's going to be focused on their personal digital lives. These executives, when they go to work, they're protected by multi-million, sometimes billion-dollar sophisticated cybersecurity programs. But as soon as they walk into the home, their spouse, their kids, they have no protection. And so this is taking a look at their digital lives, home networks, personal devices, online accounts, looking at targeted cyber threats, because executives are high value targets for threat actors, cyber criminals, because of the level of access they have into their corporate environment. So we wanted to help the industry with this new DEP and with standards, kind of like a NIST standards, right? A playbook. And these standards help you formalize your best practices for then protecting your executives when they're outside your corporate perimeter, so to speak. They provide this framework so that way you have consistency, you have accountability, and then you get measurable outcomes in their executive cybersecurity protection, especially as threats evolve and there's a lot of sometimes regulatory scrutiny is going to increase with this area as well, I think.
Yeah. And I think, it's really easy to forget. People often look at security and they just all they think about are big enterprises, the business side of it. They forget that actually the biggest vulnerability is always people, but arguably they're also the reason they're the biggest vulnerability is they're the ones that get attacked. They're the people that are what kind of, I suppose, threat actors or wherever it may be going for. If we were to kind of look at some like practical steps executives or organizations could implement, because obviously I think a lot of people probably don't even necessarily think about when they're going home, and a lot of people might give their kids their phone to play games on, especially if you've got really young ones, and that's exactly what they want to do. They see mum or dad sat there on the phone, so they're like, hey, I want to have a go too. I mean, are there any kind of things that you would say, look, here's something you could implement immediately to help improve kind of your digital security posture?
Yeah, absolutely. For some of that, practical steps they need to take immediately, in my opinion, is going to be, conducting a personal risk assessment of your key executives. What information is about there? Because executive protection, especially digital, isn't just about privacy. Isn't just about, hey, if I Google my name, what information is about there? It's everything. So doing that risk assessment, what information is out there, not just in the open web, but also in the deep or the dark web as well. And then we corporations consistently will do what's called penetration testing, right, on their work environments. But when was the last time anyone did that on their home environment to look at all that stuff? So they need to conduct an audit of all of their home network devices and especially IoT devices. What devices are we allowing into our homes and what are they connected to? And then focusing on, are our executives using VPNs, encrypted messaging? What are they using on their personal devices? So trying to take an overall assessment of all of that, and then getting into, enroll those executives in cybersecurity monitoring services, whatever that may be. So that way they look at the corporate stuff, but they really got to start looking at the personal side of things. And then it's just the normal education of phishing, social engineering. The executives get a lot of that in the corporate side, but what about the spouses? What about the kids? To your point earlier, yeah, we give our kids, when we sit down to dinner, to watch a video or play a game, and think of all the stuff they have access to while they're on there playing around. Doesn't matter, whatever it is that they're doing, we need that education to expand beyond the executive.
Yeah, for sure. And would you say, is there anything in particular that you see as a big reoccurring trend of, look, this is actually the biggest thing that people often fall down on, that's always like one of those that is kind of the eye roll of course this has happened again. Is there any real, because it's obviously a massive landscape to look at, so many things to protect, but are there some key things that you'd be like, this is one everyone falls for?
Yeah, the big one is password reuse. People, whether it's there's all sorts of password managers out there, but what what are they using? What is their exposure? Are they reusing passwords that have already been identified in a data breach, for example?
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing I see is we'll expose a password. The one I always like to use is, hey, are you using the password Fluffy Bunny 123? Oh, uh, yeah, I am. Why is that a problem? Yeah, because I identified it in a data breach, which means it's being used. Well, I don't use that password anymore. I use Fluffy Bunny 123, and I added an exclamation point at the end. Right? That I get that a lot, and then their eyes get really big. Like, well, is since you found it in my personal, breaches, is it bad that I'm using that password in my corporate domain? Absolutely, right? You really, it really clicks with them when you start to expose that because those are just the little things. It's password reuse and sharing passwords with family members, right? They'll just, if one of your kids, hey, Dad, I need the password for Netflix. What is it? Oh, they send you a text message with the password. Again,
Yeah.
another data point, another leak. So it's really coming down to passwords because that's how we secure all of our devices.
Yeah. And sometimes I think it's just so easy to overlook, especially if you're working as an executive that's not in security. Like, I think it's just so easy to forget that, when you work in cyber, you kind of you sit there and you're like, well, this is obvious. Of course it's obvious. But actually, when you're not exposed to what the kind of the darker side of that world looks like and what some of the threats and just the realities of the space and how vulnerable most people are, you probably don't actually realize it's until you guys come along and you're like, well, no, actually, these are the issues, and this is where you're really kind of leading yourself to be vulnerable, where they're kind of like, oh my days. That's terrifying. Um so, I mean, to kind of move on a little bit, because obviously you've been working with the Ponemon Institute. I mean, what are some of the most striking stats or trends from that research that executives should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest takeaways I got from their research is that a significant percentage of executives have had their information exposed in data breaches on their personal side. You think of all the data breaches that are out there and the information that's tied to them, and with that, a lot of organizations lack the visibility into those targeted threats when it's outside the corporate environment because that's what they're focused on. They're focused on the corporate environment, and so in that research as well, the cost of executive targeted attacks is just on the rise, both whether it's financially or even reputationally for those individuals, and then the rise in all the sophisticated attacks because of machine learning or AI, however you want to phrase it as well.
And this may seem like, to a lot of people working in cyber, like a bit of a silly question, but for anybody that's tuning in that maybe hasn't necessarily thought about kind of what we're talking about here, and this is the first time that's really kind of going, oh wow, maybe I need to take this seriously. From some of those stats, we talk about how many have been in data leaks and stuff like that. Are there many that aren't even aware of how what that they've been in these data leaks, or maybe they're aware but they don't necessarily take action because they just don't realize the significance of what that actually might look like, or the realities of it, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just be kind of a lot of these data breaches because they happen so frequently, they've become white noise. You kind of you get alert fatigued. We hear that term a lot in security operations centers because we get so many alerts. Well, it's happening to the individuals or maybe on the corporate side because you go to the news and there's a new data breach every week. Something was leaked out there. I could send you a notification once a week saying, hey, Katie, your social security number was found on the dark web. Okay, great. Or your phone number was found on the dark web. Great. What can I do about it? We need that actionable side of things. And one of the other striking stats was that only about 48% of organizations have currently some sort of digital executive protection in their security strategies, meaning they just don't have that viewpoint of what is exposed for them. And the biggest thing with anything that's exposed in the dark web and data breaches is what is actionable. That's what we need to really start focusing on and not just and getting away from the white noise.
Yeah, because I think that's often one of the biggest challenges, arguably, is people are like, oh, it's all great being told that there's this issue, but how do I fix it? How do you kind of, and then how do you remediate those risks for the future? And I think that's another big thing. You briefly touched base on it there, but this is probably, like I said at the beginning, one of the probably the fastest evolving landscape because of the new technology that we're getting exposed to, especially when we look at AI and Gen AI. I mean, how do you see kind of like digital executive protection evolving over the next few years when we consider this kind of technology and the new attack vectors that it's kind of bringing to the table?
Yeah, absolutely. It's gonna open up a lot of new attack vectors, especially because with AI now and some of the attacks they can drive, whether it's deep fakes, voice cloning, automated phishings, right? They're going to be able to take this machine learning, take all these, all this information that's out there about us, and you're now going to be able to collect all of this information, and then not just about the executive, but their family members, and then they can branch out and really broaden their attack vector when it comes to a lot of this information, because I now don't have to manually go to, when we talk about open source intelligence, where is our information? If I have to go to 10 different websites to try to find information about you and get you a target, it's a lot of work. And cyber criminals, they go after the low hanging fruit, so to speak. They go after the easy targets. Any kind of campaigns go after the easy targets. Well, now they're able to collect all of this information with just a couple clicks. It's all automated. They can collect all that information, and then it gives them all sorts of new targets that are now the easy prey, so to speak. So it's going to evolve, a lot with, behavioral analytics, that continuous monitoring and integration with physical security because of all the information we put out there in social media. Whether it's, hey, I'm attending this conference. Now with AI, they can figure out who else is going to be at that conference, what kind of targets are going to be there, who am I going to target. And then the biggest attack, we were talking about this earlier, the biggest attack now is, people are stealing iPhones, but not for the actual iPhone itself. They
Yeah.
want the data that's on your iPhone, your Android, whatever it is, but they're going to do it when it's unlocked. So they're going to, try to get that device when you've been using it. So it comes to, that's where we need to partner with physical security, and that's why this DEP protocol, this framework talks about physical protection too, because we need to have that partnership in there because of all the new information that people can get about who we are, where we're going to be, when we're going to be. And then we have that physical aspect of, I need to be aware of my surroundings. Do I want to be walking down the street on my iPhone scrolling social media for someone to grab my phone, or do I want to maybe wait till I get to that coffee shop so I can sit down and see people around me and then do my work on my phone? Little
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy to kind of, separate the two when you look at physical and digital security because you just think, oh, but actually it's like you say they do go hand in hand. You need the whole picture. One is only so strong without the other. There's you need kind of everything to be protected, especially when your digital side is so accessible from mobile phones or whatever it may be. I mean, I'm trying to think of other things, and I'm here thinking your Kindle's probably not too vulnerable, but you never know. It's like there's a whole host of things there. And so, I mean, kind of what's next on the cards for you guys? Because it's like you mentioned, this is something that's still relatively new. This is something that for the past several years is obviously becoming more and more prominent, but is naturally going to be more and more in demand. Not only because we're seeing so many more businesses come in and more executives working within the fields, but also obviously everybody's very reliant with business on technology now. Like like everything's say in the cloud, and also people travel a lot more for work and they're working remotely and they're working from anywhere in the world. I mean, are there kind of any next steps for you guys, especially now that you've announced these new DEP standards, that are kind of things that you're like, this is what the new roadmap looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. It's continue to evolve, trying to be, at a holistic solution, at least for us. And that's why we launched the identity verification. That's the next big step of trying to combat, deepfakes. Am I really talking to you right now? Is this really Katie that I'm talking to in this podcast? I need a way to be able to verify that, or especially when we start talking about all these fraudulent wire transfers, when people get into emails or do typo squatting. You think of all the different attacks. How do we truly verify? And when to the previous point of machine learning and AI kind of figuring out who's connected to you in this, in the world. Now I can, hey, I know you have grandchildren. I know you have children. I'm going to portray to be them. How do I then verify that I'm actually talking to my cousin, to my niece, to my nephew, whoever it may be? I need a way to be able to verify that. And that's why we launched the identity verification to continue to, because we have to always continue to evolve. The threat
Yeah.
actors are going to, we need to do the same. And that's the first next step.
Yeah, I always talk about the fact that it's a bit of a cat and mouse chase. There's always one in front of the other, but the roles are never they never stay that way for too long. And I think kind of you touch base on that fact there because I don't think people quite realize how advanced the technology is, and everybody still looks at like AI as, oh well, you can tell when something's written by AI, and it's actually like, well, actually, if you're really good at prompting it, it's actually not that obvious anymore. And if it, there's certain videos and stuff that we're seeing come out where it's like, actually, if someone's really good at the prompts and they're really good at putting it together and they truly understand that technology, it's almost becoming hard, for an everyday person to actually distinguish the two. And I think kind of, yeah, people don't always recognize that. Um, I suppose because this has been a great episode, Brian, and so much to unpack and really valuable information. But yeah, I mean, if we were going to close out here and say, if there's one things that organizations could do like today to get ahead of executive kind of targeted risk, I mean, what would it be? Is there something that kind of, I don't know, if whether it's a CISO listening in or just kind of anybody that's running on that kind of team going, right, this is probably the quickest bit of action that's going to have the biggest amount of impact for you.
Absolutely, and that this is exactly why we came up with this framework. It's, hey, we don't do everything in that framework. It's for the industry, and so the top recommendation is for, if it's a CISO, if it's a CEO, whoever's listening, establish a formal digital executive protection program. So that way, it includes that personal threat assessments, continuous monitoring in their personal lives, some sort of executive cybersecurity training in their personal lives, for their spouses, for their children, and then looking at those, treat executive digital risk at a board level too. So anyone, where people need to start is who has the most exposure. If I go to your website today, whose picture is going to be found with a bio, right? Those are going to be your prime targets. Those are the people you start with, and then you work your way down through the organization. But they need to establish this program and partner with, all of everyone that's going to be a part of this, whether it's physical security, because that's also some of the problem too, is cyber teams will say, well, this is a physical problem. The physical teams can say, oh, it's a cyber problem. We need to come together and establish this as one.
Awesome. Well, what a bit of advice to be closing out on. And Brian, thank you so much for joining me here today. I think this has been an unbelievable episode. Really great to unpack this part of I think just a part of the industry people don't always think about, but arguably one of the most important, especially if you're working kind of some of these enterprises. But to our listeners, I mean, as always, don't forget to subscribe. Make sure to share this episode with your security peers. And arguably at this point, you probably don't need to, it doesn't have to just be security for this episode. Anybody you think this could be relevant to, because it's definitely going to hit home for quite a lot of people out there. But get connected with us on LinkedIn, get connected with Brian and the team over on LinkedIn, especially if you think there could be some further conversations that are worthwhile having. But that's it for today. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time for more conversations shaping cyber.